Good morning, good afternoon, good evening around the world. My name is Doug Brunke. I'm the founder and CEO of Global Chamber. This is one of my personal favorite programs that we've been doing at Global Chamber almost right from the beginning 5-6 years ago. We've been doing it in the city of Phoenix for coming up on the sixth one. We've been doing these because my own perspective on women in leadership is that they are really good at it. And it's really sad to see, at least I've seen in my career, where women have been left back just because they're a woman. And I've told those stories before. I won't bore you with those again. I think there's things that we all can do. And because I think the other aspect of this is, there are challenges, absolutely. And the leaders we have assembled today have overcome those challenges. We also all benefit, we believe, if women are allowed to ascend to leadership. And it goes beyond women. It goes to anyone who has capabilities and skills, whether it's in business or education or nonprofits, whatever area is having impact from a global perspective. Just let people be people and let them rise to whatever level they can be, and the world becomes a better place. And that's what we've seen over and over again. And so we're here to talk about that with 6 extraordinary leaders. I'll introduce each of them as we introduce them as speakers. We're going to have a Q&A. So we have 3 questions. Kind of leading into this conversation that's going to take about an hour. We do plan to finish on time. If we go over a minute or two, maybe, but we typically do finish right on time. If you have questions, please feel free to type them in the chat area. If we don't get to them, unlikely we will, but if we do have a chance, we can perhaps cover it in the blog post that will cover this conversation post. So let's start first with Cheri Daly. Cheri Daly is someone who is the Executive Director of Global Program Development, Marketing, and Communications at the University of Utah. I remember meeting Cheri fairly close to when she had her assignment starting in 2013, I believe. And I remember maybe even with Dr. Pershing, he said, call him Dave. Sorry, Dave. Dave and Cheri and Michael Huntsman. I don't think Hardman. I have his name right.
Hardman.
What is it?
Hardman. Sorry.
Hardman. Thank you. The Huntsman Center and Michael Hardman. And in those days when you started, Cheri, the question seemed to be, can we get our hands around everything that's global? There are so many things going on, especially at an institute of higher education where professors are kind of doing whatever they're doing, and they're doing some really good work, but who knows about it? And is there a way to coordinate it and kind of help foster more impact? And so you took a lot of that on and subsequently took all of that on. So congratulations on not only taking that leadership, but also having some significant impact. So we have a question for you, and we'll let you kick this one off. You've had impact, and at some point in your career, which started in technology and moved on to education, when did you start to grasp that there were different standards and expectations and treatment between men and women? At that time, when you started to understand what those differences were, what did you do about it? And how did you handle it? And how did you make both the best of it and hopefully make some positive change in addition to everything else that you were doing? Please go ahead. Let's kick it off.
Okay. Thanks, Doug, and thanks to all the wonderful women and Dave and Doug for being here today. I mean, certainly starting in technology, I think that's a very black and white issue when it comes to differences with gender, especially I started back in the early 80s when personal computers hadn't even really been introduced. So the gender disparity was pretty stark. And I found to be successful in working with large groups of male software engineers, and then eventually, well, it's pretty much software engineers throughout my technology career. I did a lot of listening, and I worked very hard to understand what it was they did. And eventually where I was successful is that I became basically the liaison between these large groups of engineers who, were convinced that everything they did was great and awesome, and the user community, which often was mystified by what it was that they were seeing or what it was they were trying to use. And so I got in the middle, I sat in the middle between the engineering teams and between the user communities. And so I spent a long time, really, like, I would sit through all the, the code meetings, the project meetings, and it got to the point where I became very good at going back and forth, to the point where I was actually, when I was working for AOL at one point, they needed a large engineering project to be managed to completion, and it wasn't happening. So they sent me back to actually manage the team, which was all male software engineers, to get the product finished. Through that experience, I think I realized, I was thinking about that this morning, is that I think that translated into working globally in an interesting way, because it was about listening, and it's about understanding what the different perspectives are and being able to communicate, because obviously a lot of what we do internationally is working across cultures. It's understanding what the differences are in our various interactions there. I've been working in international higher ed. We're bringing groups of international people to undertake programs at the University of Utah, and understanding what their needs are, oftentimes with layers of different cultural differences. I think the experience I had early on in understanding that I may be an outlier. So I'm an outlier maybe in a group of men, but I'm also potentially an outlier culturally in a different situation. So I think the experiences in both were very helpful. Also just approaching with a sense of humility. I mean, the more I think about it, being able to go in and say, I don't know what I don't know. And so I'm going to be a very active listener, and I'm going to really work to understand what it is I'm being told, or what we're trying to accomplish as a team here, as a collaboration between cultures or between groups, or between, all of those situations, I think really gave me a lot of important background.
What a contrast to sometimes the male world of not doing listening. So I love your thought process around patience and listening, and really trying to establish rapport, which is, as you know, so critically important on the global side of things. Our next speaker, Lelani Craig, is the CEO at CommGap. She's founded her business, and she's a really significant leader, not just in global business, but what's called the localization industry. And Lelani, thank you so much for your leadership and all that you've done. What's your perspective on this? How did you initially see that gap, and what have you done over time to address the gap, and also have greater impact despite the challenge?
Thank you. I love what Cheri said. I too, in the early 80s, found out that at my high school, they were teaching a basic programming class, and I wasn't invited. And so I approached the instructor and I said, I want to learn how to do basic programming. And he let me into the class, and I was the only girl. For a full year, I was the only girl taking a basic programming class. Fast forward to college, and I took more computer classes. I never majored in computers. I just felt like this was the future I needed to learn and understand. And diving into that helped me looking forward. But that's when I started to notice some of the differences. Not only was I the only woman in a business, I worked for a computer store. My title was Office Automation Consultant because I knew how to use a word processor. This is early 80s. From then, that allowed me to be hired by Data General Computers. If any of you remember Data General, I was part of the initial work with WordPerfect. And so this allowed my career to continue. So moving into localization, which is all technology, it's languages and technology, I was able to combine the two. But that also put me in a field where I was the only woman in the room for many, many years. And I learned that if you are knowledgeable, if you understand, if you are educated, and you continue to progress with the technology, with the industry, then you are considered equal. Early on, it was a challenge. It really was. But we are now at a different place, and I established CommGap almost 22 years ago. And this has allowed the company to grow and become a leader in the industry of localization and technology in the language industry.
Congratulations on all of that. So I think what you're saying is, study hard, do hard work.
You do, yeah. Don't hold yourself back. You need to keep pushing forward. Yeah.
Fantastic. No, great. And you've certainly done that. The localization industry is dominated by women to a large extent, isn't it? Or,
the language industry is not so much localization, which localization, as you know, is a division of the language industry. The language industry is dominated by females in the sense that many women own companies because they came down the ranks of being interpreters and translators and then eventually creating a company. But if you look at the larger scale of the companies that do localization, it's mostly male dominated.
Okay, interesting. Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing. Thanks for kicking us off. Our next speaker is Beth Colosimo. She's the executive director of the Mill and Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses at Salt Lake Community College. You've had your own entrepreneurial career, Beth, and you deal with, oh my goodness, so many different entrepreneurs as well. When did you connect up with this concept that women were viewed differently and perhaps even held back? And then how have you addressed that over time, including today, if you'd like to share some ideas there?
Sure, and I know you've got lots to cover, so I'll be quick in just a couple minutes. But my story also back to the early 80s when I was a college student at the University of Utah. Yay, Dave. But I was a communications major, and I got an opportunity when I was a freshman to be an intern at Channel 4. And it was a great opportunity because at that time, very few women were interns in the sports department. And so I had the opportunity to be an intern in sports where they had traditionally only ever hired men. And this was, before really there were any female anchors in sports or reporters. And I took the work really seriously. I wanted to be in broadcasting, and I worked really, really hard to do whatever I could to prove myself. And unfortunately, my story took a turn in that I had a very shocking, traumatic, blatant sexual harassment inflicted upon me by a coworker who was an anchor at the station at the time in the sports department. I was in a situation at a very, very young age to have to confront something that I had never been exposed to. And my work was questioned and required to be, I think, above anyone else's because I rejected those advances. And so, quite frankly, my life was made pretty miserable in just trying to do the work that I was hired to do, to pursue the profession that I wanted as a young, 19-year-old trying to break through into an industry that really didn't showcase women. So what did I do about it? I went to upper management, and I was obviously low man on the totem pole. I was just an intern trying to find my way in the world. And while my voice was heard, my shaky voice, it took a lot of courage for me to come forward. But it ultimately ended up changing the trajectory of my career. I was just had such a bad taste in my mouth, in that there was very little done to address the situation. And I ultimately ended up leaving that career, and of course that job, because it was just untenable. But, you know, as far as going forward, it made me a lot stronger, a lot wiser, a lot more attuned to what women have to face in the working world, especially in the early 80s. And that you know, it's just the fact that you are going to have to prove yourself, you're going to have to work hard, and just overcome those things by the fact that you're educated, you're smart, you're talented, and those things will eventually prove out.
Really important story. Thank you for sharing that. Undoubtedly, that makes you really a significant mentor and advocate also for others who have to put up with that nonsense. So thank you for sharing.
I hope so.
Our next speaker is Felecia Maxfield-Barrett. She's the executive director at the Utah Council for Citizen Diplomacy, which handles the International Visitor Leadership Program from the U.S. State Department. Felecia is a graduate from University of Utah. Congratulations. Anthropology is one of your degrees. That was my first elective class at the U when I was becoming an engineer. So a really interesting background that has led you to a nonprofit leadership. So congratulations on your success. Could you tell us a little bit more about when you realized that things had different standards and how you've dealt with it?
Yeah, and thank you, Doug, for inviting me to this conversation, because I think it is such an incredibly needed conversation. I don't think we can ever stop talking about women's role in leadership. Yeah, so my story definitely started when I became a mom. And right before that, I had read the book, and I can't remember who wrote it. It was the woman from Facebook, Lean In. And, you know, being very young in my career and ambitious and not knowing the better, you know, the premise of the book is you just have to sacrifice more. We as women, if we want to have that seat at the table, we have to sacrifice our family time, our personal time, our mental health time in order to elbow our way in. And, you know, I thought, okay, I can definitely do this. And then I became a mom, and it was such a rude awakening, you know, realizing it. And I was an executive director of a nonprofit at the time. And, you know, the 60-hour work weeks on top of being a mom and a wife and a community advocate, like I just wore myself incredibly thin, to the point where the job wasn't fun anymore. You know, I was working with refugees, which is absolutely a passion of mine, but I just couldn't do it. I burned out fast. And so I resigned as being an executive director, and I went to go work for another wonderful nonprofit organization that allowed me the space and the flexibility to do what I needed to do. So if one day my child was sick and I needed to be home with her, I absolutely had that freedom to go home, and I could do some work around the time that I was available, you know, or I could go and work in the office if I needed to, and I could bring my child with me. I mean, it was a lot of flexibility. And I realized that this story that we tell, especially young women who have these dreams and desires to make the world a better place, that all they have to do is spread themselves even thinner, is the way that you become a leader in the community. And I think that's absolutely an incorrect story that we need to tell. I think we as employers need to create a culture in our workplace that really does adapt with our employees' needs. You know, and I think that COVID is definitely a good example of that. All of a sudden, you know, women, and I'm definitely stereotyping here because I know that men also experience this as well. But for my own personal story, I was put into the home. I was now a teacher to my child. And so all of a sudden, and I still have a business to run. And so all of a sudden I found myself waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning, doing a couple of hours of work, then becoming a teacher during the day. And then in the evening, going back and becoming an executive director. And it was like, oh my gosh, too many hats. Yeah, so yeah, we as employers just need to create these cultures in our workplace that really do allow flexibility and also free up some capacity. We can't run at 100%. You know, I tell my staff all the time, like, aim to shoot for around 80% capacity, because you are going to have things fall on your lap. And then you've got that extra capacity that you can adapt to when you need to, or if we need to pick up somebody else's workload because something happens to them, we can do so. Yeah, you know, the only other thing I want to say is something that I found really important throughout this learning curve of how to be a female leader is succession plans. We've got to create succession plans, especially for the young female talent, so that they're not skipping from one job to another job to another job because it pays more, or the benefits are better, or it's more flexibility. We've got to work through what are their long-term goals so that we can retain that talent. We invest so much, and young women are just incredible powerhouses that if we can keep this energy, like, let's do what we can. And so, yeah, just some really basic lessons that I've learned over the last few years of being a woman leader.
Great thoughts. And I think what COVID has taught us is that women in leadership is actually taken a step backwards, right? In terms of the numbers. And if anybody is interested in that data, we've talked about it at other programs, but it's a little bit shocking, you know, that we've taken a step back in terms of the percentages, and hopefully, and we certainly would love to see things shift back over the next several years. Thank you. Really great ideas. Made notes on those really strategically important thoughts. Kim, you are an entrepreneur. You've started your own company. You're the CEO of MLIT. You're in the logistics industry. Speaking of global trade, right? There's a lot of things going on in logistics and supply chain these days, and I'm sure you've got your hands full. You know, taking a step back though, in terms of as a woman, and as you've gone through your career, at some point you realized that there were issues, and how have you dealt with those in a positive way or a negative way, if there were some of those as well?
Depends on my age. So I mean, it was really interesting. So when I first started in logistics, my background is I grew up on a ranch. Genders don't exist on a ranch. Everybody has to do work. I remember one time I said to my dad, "But I'm a girl." And yeah, I don't remember the rest of that day. But my dad was very much a feminist. My mom was very much a feminist, in the sense that everyone has to pull their own weight. And when you grow up on a ranch, you know, you're lifting with the boys, and you're doing the same things, and you're learning the same things. So when I went in the military, it transpired into the same thing. You know, I was an aircraft mechanic. So gender issues never really hit me until I started in this industry. I was bringing in goods for a supplier I worked for big, large curtain wall windows for some of the buildings here in Vegas. And I remember, because my name is Kim Daniels, when you're working with people in China, they make the assumption that you are Daniel Kim, or you are a man named Kim Daniels. And so until I went to China to actually meet with my subordinates, I didn't have any problems. And then I did. And then it was, you know, they were jumping at the time that, you know, basically another man would come in and say, "Hey, you need to do this." And I'm like, "I'm here for a week. We need to get this done." Because I'm going back home in a week. So the only time I really ever had an issue, or the first issue really, was working in China. I was about 30 years old, and I show up, and I wasn't who they expected. And so I did run into a couple of hiccups with that. And then I had the conversation with the people who own the company, and a woman owned the company too. So that really helped to push forward on getting work done, even after the initial hiccup. And then the other thing I've run into really is, pay. The pay factor has actually been a big issue, where my previous employer, didn't want to pay me my value. And I was like, "Look, I built this freight division for you, and you're paying me a pittance, and like I could, like seriously, I've done this for the last 2 years. It would be really, I need a raise. And he laid me off. He was like, nope, we're done with that. And they closed for about 6 months, that division. I made sure I took all their licenses with me and my clients with me, because I don't sign non-competes. And that's how I started my company. And then they ended up hiring someone to run the division. They hired a man, and they paid him more than I was asking. And that is where it really snapped. Like, seriously, like my kids were already self-sufficient. I didn't, and I know that there's a gender pay gap. It's not just based on gender. It's really based on the mom issue, right? So being a mom, it can really hit you hard, because it's called the motherhood penalty. And I was watching it last night on this great documentary on Prime, on Netflix. And there is this huge penalty, because as a mom, you don't get to be involved in a lot of the things that happen after hours, because you got to go pick up the kids, and you got to go to doctor's appointments, and you got to do all the stuff. And that's where a lot of that disparity ends up. And that's where I've seen it most, is really in pay and advancement.
Okay. Oh, that makes sense. And that's still an issue, obviously, right? I think it's 77 cents to the dollar, even currently. So
yeah, especially for moms.
Thank you for sharing that. Our last speaker is Dr. David Pershing. I'll call him Dave. I've called him Professor in my life. He actually started as an adjunct professor in 1987 in chemical engineering, which I graduated in. He taught me heat transfer and thermodynamics in those days. And somehow an adjunct professor of chemical engineering made it all the way through every hurdle, all the way to become president of the University of Utah from 2012 through 2018. Pretty phenomenal story. So Dave, you've seen some extraordinary things undoubtedly from a professional standpoint. And then from this standpoint, in terms of women, and certainly like in my class, I think there were 28 people who graduated, 2 women, 26 men. You've been surrounded in those days by mostly men, but as you took over for the university, clearly, many, many women at the university, and that you needed to deal with. Could you let us know a little bit more about your perspectives on this question?
I'll be glad to, and this is a question that I feel fairly passionate about. Cheri and some of the others that know me well would understand that. When I was an undergraduate in chemical engineering at Purdue University, a really long time ago, I was in a class of 100 students, and there was 1 woman. And
wow.
That was my first experience with this kind of issue. She was very smart. She was one of the top students in the class and got along well. She and I were great friends. And ultimately, she went on to found her own company, which was highly successful. But that was the way it was. Actually, this is the 70s, not the 80s. I also have 3 daughters. All my children are daughters. And so I've had, unfortunately, up close and personal experiences with some of the kinds of things that you've talked about before. One time I spent several hours counseling a young woman who's in graduate school, whose professor suggested that maybe she would rather be home having babies than be in the graduate program. Just unbelievable. Now, I hope nobody at the university, I'm sure nobody at the university would say such a thing today, but that's the way it was at that era. When I became Dean of Engineering, I was horrified to discover that we had one tenure track professor in the entire College of Engineering. Clearly, that was not great and needed immediate attention. So I worked hard by putting money in the right places and also talking about these issues with the leaders in the college. And my goal was, by the time I left as Dean of Engineering, we would have at least 1 woman in every department. I didn't quite make that, but now we have 43 female faculty in the College of Engineering and almost 1,000 young women in our program, students in our engineering program. So we've come a really long ways in that. My first graduate student was actually a woman, and she went on to build her own company and has been very successful. And this is typical of many of the young women that I've worked with. They tend to be very smart in engineering, and they are willing to take the chances and do the things it takes to start their own company and be successful. And I'm very pleased about that. One of my graduate students is actually now a dean of engineering here in the West, something that we've needed more of in terms of leadership. We need more role models at the senior leadership level. After we finished our new engineering building, which is the John and Marva Warnock engineering building, one of the students came up to me and said how glad she was to be studying in a building named for a woman. And I never thought of it that way before. But if you think about it, there aren't very many universities where the engineering building is named for a woman. And so we're proud of that. During my time as president, I was able to surround myself with really terrific women in senior leadership roles, including the provost. And this was the result of open searches that found the best candidate that there was, and it happened to turn out to be a woman. So I am a huge believer in the importance of diversity and gender diversity in the leadership team. We've got to get more women in the C-suite level. And it's worked out, I have to say, in a selfish way, it's worked out very well for me because women bring great ideas to the table. Doug?
No question about it. Thank you. Great thoughts. Thanks to all of you. Given that we're a tad over on the first one, I'll probably end up modifying, like merging question 2 and 3 so that we can fully get through. What I'd like to ask each of you, and we'll go in the same order, is, asking you what is global leadership to you? Are we on the right track? And what advice do you have for women and for men, as we enter this next post-COVID phase in terms of surviving and thriving, in the new environment? So let's go back to Cheri. What are your thoughts about this? And given the different layers of the question, feel free to answer the parts that you feel
Okay, great.
are the most significant.
One of the things I was hearing as a theme from what all of these brilliant women and obviously Dave is that there's no complacency, right? That what we're doing, we're pushing beyond the boundaries. We're saying, okay, I'm not going to, and honestly, not to gender bash, but there are a lot of men who slide into their roles because it's expected that they're going to succeed in that, and there's just an expectation that, well, I'm going to get this and I'm going to do this, and I think as women leaders, you're never complacent. I think the good news in that is that the access to technology, the access to information, the whole shift as the internet has made the world so much smaller, and certainly as demonstrated by what we've all had to go through with COVID, has provided women some additional opportunities. It was interesting. I just came back from Islamabad a week and a half ago, and the University of Utah just was awarded a $19 million USAID grant to help improve higher education in Pakistan. And it's a very exciting grant and a very exciting opportunity. Obviously a very traditional patriarchal society. But what was so exciting to me is that in the few days I was there, I had meetings where it was the women in the room who were driving. They were passionate, they had vision, they were committed. And this is, these types of initiatives are really critical to the future of the country, because you're talking about, we need to improve higher ed so that the economy is better, so that the opportunities for people in the country are better, to improve everyone's lives. And they're seeing that gestalt. They're not seeing this as being, well, this is a good thing for me to do for my career. They're saying this is critical for our country. And so those are where I really see, global leaders, with female global leaders emerging to drive where we need to be. There are crises, global crises that we're all dealing, climate change and the economy and COVID. And you look at potentially like the difference in, I was just thinking like Brazil versus New Zealand, obviously different countries, but we're fine, we're not going to deal with this versus New Zealand, the female leader went, we locked down, we're good, right? I mean, I think we're seeing examples of female leadership internationally that are inspiring, that are helping to inspire that next generation. And thank you for the Shadman Bashir. Thank you for the little shout out in chat. So I think there's a lot of opportunities, and like I said, passion, humility. I think more and more there's a recognition of what women bring to the table in these new challenges, and I think there's a lot that's very exciting about where we have opportunities to go from here.
Absolutely. Thank you. Shadman Bashir works the international office at Dixie State University, really kind of like from nothing, amazing things grow sometimes. And Shadman, coming from Pakistan, has created in Southern Utah a phenomenon, in terms of international students. So Shadman, he's one of our global advisors in Utah, continued success. Again, a case of a man who's stepped forward and made a significant impact in Southern Utah, of all places. Go figure.
Fantastic.
Lelani Craig, how do you see what's your view of global leadership, and then the different parts of this question? What would you like to share? What advice do you have, or what's your outlook for the future?
I think as part of global leadership, we teach and we encourage people to always be prepared. Change is going to happen. You cannot avoid change. You cannot avoid the next pandemic. We have to be ready. Early on in my life, I experienced changes, not just moving from a different country. I moved here from Argentina when I was a little girl to Idaho, which was a complete culture shock. Then in my early 30s, I became a widow with 3 little kids. And that was a defining point in my life. Nothing drives me more crazy than to hear a woman put herself down. I can't do that. I'm not sure how to do it. I'll get my grandkids to do it. I'm like, why? Learn, just do it. There's a way to do things. So I hope that moving forward, women and humanity in general understands the importance of education, the importance of preparing yourself, the importance of learning how to deal with fear and with difficulties to be able to continue to progress and move forward. And there are resources. Become aware of resources, become aware of where you can improve yourself, where you can make the changes that you need to make, and keep that eye on that goal, knowing that your path may go like this, it may go back and forth, but you will eventually get there. It's very doable.
I like how the two of you, Cheri, talked about not being complacent and making sure that you're always vigilant and take action. And you're adding another layer to it, is just do it, get it done. Do it.
Yeah.
We did a blog post recently about the fellow who wrote "Don't try" on his gravestone. Don't tell me about you trying this or trying that. Just get it done. Learn like you did, in college, and learn what you do every day at work, and you're going to progress. Love the message. What about you, Beth? How do you see global leadership, and what would you like to add to the conversation?
Yeah, I love what Lelani said, and I think education is such a big piece of building that confidence. So I run a program at Salt Lake Community College called the Executive Certificate of Global Management. And what we've seen with educating people how to be global business leaders, it really does build that confidence and takes away that intimidation factor of, oh, wait a minute, I'm a female business owner and I actually can grow my company internationally, and I can go on international trade missions, and there are resources available. So I think having that educational foundation, and what I've seen in our course is how many more women are starting to take our program. And in the Entrepreneurship Center, the number of women who are co-working in our incubator, and our Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses program is now 50% women business owners who are embracing that education. And it's making such a big difference in their ability to make decisions to move forward. I think that so many women are intimidated until they realize that some education, access to resources, and a network of people that can help them really will advance their cause. And as far as gender is concerned, I think it's important to consider the cultural and the sociological ideals about doing business internationally. And I think women are very sensitive and attuned to that because they've been treated differently in their own professional environments. So when they go to do business internationally, I think just inherently they're more sensitive and maybe embracing and understanding of the cultural differences, just like what was explained with Kim when she tried to do business with China. She understood where they were coming from, but she was able to overcome that. The other comment that I would make is just, it's so mystifying to me, and I'm certainly no sociologist, but I would imagine that sociologists have a heyday with, we have this lightning speed change in technology, and we can barely keep pace with the changes and constantly trying to educate ourselves on global change and trade barriers and international tariffs and all of the things that come with global business. The technology is passing us by at rapid speed, yet we still are having these kinds of conversations about how women are still having to explain themselves in a global business world that we're not at equal footing. And we all say, well, wouldn't it be great if we didn't have to have the conversation about how women can't borrow money from a venture capitalist at the same rate? What is it, 3 or 4% of VC investment goes to women-owned businesses. And so I just think that we have to keep having this conversation and to the point that was made, not making excuses, but just kind of pushing through and knowing that there are still those barriers, but that they're certainly overcomeable. And I'm very optimistic in what I see in the classroom. I just put together a class of 11 Congolese women who were teaching entrepreneurship skills to another point that was made. I just got back from traveling alone to Italy. I went to hike Cinque Terre by myself, and the comments and the raised eyebrows about, wow, you did that by yourself? Didn't you go with someone? Didn't you have, did you go with a tour? It's like, no, I got on a plane, I landed in Italy, and I made my way to Cinque Terre. But we still think that that's such a remarkable feat, when if a man did that, everyone would go, great, good for you, awesome, hope you had a great time and ate some good food. And for women, it's still that difference of even international travel alone is just kind of a remarkable thing. But we have to break the barriers.
So much to overcome, exactly. And it is sad that we have to keep talking about it, but it's also progress, right? It's just like, in all sorts of things in society, we just don't make enough progress fast enough, and we just have to keep working at it. And as an old dude now, it is frustrating to see after so many years, but, thinking about, the last 100, 200, 300 years, we can definitely see progress over that time. Why can't we make it faster? I think it's going to take efforts by all of us. And you've given some really great roadmap there. Thank you. Felecia, how about you? How do you see this question?
Yeah, and this is a great question and definitely in my wheelhouse. Through our Department of State exchange programs, we invite global leaders, whether they're nonprofit leaders, religious leaders, government officials, to Utah to do professional exchanges. So they'll come here on a themed program, and we find the experts in Utah doing similar work, and we put them in a room together to just talk and share best practices and resources. And so one of the things that our organization does is we track long-term impact. What happens when these visitors go back to their countries after these conversations? Do they implement any of the ideas or resources or best practices? Do they continue collaboration? And through our studies, we've been able to assess that 76% of women who participate in this program and meet with women leaders here in Utah feel more empowered when they go back to their communities to implement these ideas and changes. You know, that's huge. 76% of women, just for meeting Utah women, feel like they can make a difference in their own communities just because of an hour conversation, maybe an hour and a half conversation. So, you know, if there's one thing that I would really like to focus on is the power of collaboration, whether it's between us here, you know, on this conversation now, talking about these ideas, or as us talking with people from around the world about what it is that we're doing, what has worked and what hasn't worked. You know, what we find, and research has demonstrated, is that when you're bringing in women and you're bringing in diverse perspectives and you're bringing in minority populations to the conversation, it strengthens decision making. It's more innovative. It creates this critical process to addressing global challenges. You know, and I think Cheri gave a really good case study when you went to Pakistan and you were in a room with women, and the women had vision and they were driven and they were passionate. You know, it really is this, like, let's just get together and talk. And there really is this power in changing the world and making it more peaceful and prosperous. Just using, you know, probably the best tools that we have, and that is our voices and our minds. You know, and I think back to the woman who won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2011. Her name was Lima Gaboui, you know, who was, her and her colleagues, her female colleagues, were able to stop the war in Liberia just because they did nonviolent conversations and nonviolent protests. You know, how incredible is that, to be able to stop a war just from being present and being able to listen to each other and have a conversation. So, you know, let's collaborate more.
No question. Another Nobel Prize winner was a speaker at Global Chamber a couple of years ago, Maria Ressa, and she, you know, her aspect was bravery. You know, she basically, you know, talks about the government in a transparent way, and got the Nobel Peace Prize for being brave. And I think there is an element of bravery in what you've all talked about in terms of standing up and speaking, you know, what the right things are. I think you've also balanced that with patience and, you know, and calmness in situations, which is also valuable. So thank you for all those different aspects of this conversation. Kim, what would you like to add?
So I think the biggest aspect that really needs to be considered is just recognizing culture, right? So Beth, you talked about how I talked about the Chinese culture, and I kind of understood. But I think in our world, and especially post-COVID, the best things that we can do is teach our kids, especially our girls, how to negotiate. I think that's where we find so many problems, is there's just a lack of negotiating skills. So like when I was growing up, you don't talk back to your parents, right? But I let my kids form an argument and explain to me why they thought I was wrong. So that's a big change, because I would have gotten in so much trouble arguing with my parents, right? And I think that's a big part of it. I think also there needs to be some serious consideration to some of the things that we are adding to the workforce. So we don't really have the luxury of discrimination, which is a great thing because we can bring in more diversity, which is awesome. But there's some knee-jerk reactions, at least happening in my industry, such as allowing 18 to 21-year-olds drive big rigs. That's a little frightening because I remember me at 18, and even though I had a kid, I was not mature enough to handle you know, what are they, like 80,000 pound machine, you know? I mean, that's a lot to try to add to our workforce. So I think it's really important that we're careful with this this new world we're entering into. We understand that we can't really, you know, go into and add more people to a short industry when it comes to staff, but we need to be careful about how we do that, and those knee-jerk reactions that governments tend to make, and then, you know, kind of temper it with, hey guys, I know you want to do this and I understand where you're coming from, but what you're doing is going to potentially cause some massive fallout. And, you know, I think that's very important to recognize. And then more, I think it's going to be interesting post-COVID because I think we're going to be able to see more family integration into global leadership. So, you know, I think that's a very important part of it, is that we're going to be able to move forward and not discount the family unit. And I think that's one thing that I would like to definitely see come in the future, is that, look, we all have lives, we all have families, and we shouldn't be, you know, breaking our backs and, you know, working 16-hour days to show that we know what we're doing as moms, as women. We should be able to say, hey, you know what, I'm good at my job, but I also have a life. And I think that would be very nice post-COVID.
Interesting that you bring that up. I think it's a great perspective, because it probably opens the door to some level, right, to women, because women are in our lives, personal lives, and why not, you know, in business. And so this work from home concept also is something probably that helps the idea in the long run. Really important points. Thanks for making those. Dave, it took me 6 years after graduating with my chemical engineering degree to come to grips with this issue. I didn't see it until a lady named Marcia Cho. I went to work for DuPont. She wanted to work for DuPont Korea in Korea, and they said, no, we can't have a woman doing business work because it's just inappropriate. And then just soon after that, nobody would take the international position for the Teflon business. And so I volunteered as a 28-year-old young engineer, too young. I couldn't do it. And a woman would never be able to do it, except my boss was a woman, Ann Zaragoza, a Hispanic woman, and her boss was an African-American man, unusual. Both of them stuck up for me and said, give this guy a chance, you know, and they stepped in and they created maybe, you know, a bad thing, because I got involved with international business, but it did set off a chain reaction for me to become Mr. Global and eventually create Global Chamber. But it was an Hispanic woman and an African-American man who really made it happen. Otherwise, who knows? You've been in that position where it was 1 in 100 in the 70s in your class at Purdue, and then you came to the university and you had a chance to do some really amazing things, which you've done. How do you view this question, and then what's left to tackle?
Well, I want to begin by sort of supporting what Felecia said about education. I think there is no doubt that the thing we can do for our young women is to help make sure that they get an education. I'm working, my oldest daughter is an MD, PhD. My middle daughter is currently in graduate school, and my youngest daughter just got accepted for architecture. So I strongly believe in that. Obviously, I'm biased because I'm in the university, but I do believe that if you can get particularly a graduate degree, that is more likely to allow you to be in the room where it happens, just as they say in the Hamilton song. I believe that strongly. And so I want to reinforce that. I also think that great leaders and great leadership comes from a place of common interest and dedication to make your company or your university or your organization better for both the people who work inside the organization and the people who you're serving on the outside. And if you start off with that concept, things just go better for you, I believe. And the problem today is we have such extreme views on so many things that the middle ground, I think, sometimes tend to get lost. And we want to be sure that happens. There's no question as several have said, that we need to be inclusive as leaders. We need diverse voices in the room, helping us make the right decisions. And I have seen many times where the women in my cabinet would bring up aspects of the decision that the guys hadn't thought about, that were critical to getting to the right decision. So I am a passionate believer in that. And finally, I would just like to follow up on something Kim said, because I think what COVID has done, many bad things for sure, but it's also helped us with some other things. And what the people in the organizations now want is they want a better work-life balance. We've seen that we can work from home. All of us had to do it for basically a year, and in the main. And so I don't think there's any doubt what I see inside the university and also with my commercial friends is that people today want better work-life balance. They want recognition that they need mental health care as well as what we've always had is sort of clinical medicine care. And they want the opportunity to work from home part of the time at least, not necessarily all the time, but they want to have more flexibility in the way they're working. So those are the things I would say, Doug.
Wow, really, really important. One of the most significant things you said there, I thought, was the shared vision of and building off of that rather than different opinions about various things. And really, the shared vision, isn't it success? We want to be more successful.
That's right.
And you said yourself, you've experienced it to know that having women in the room makes it a better place. The data has shown it too. But you've seen it firsthand. Isn't that really kind of where we should start, is that it makes sense for running a university or a business?
That's right.
So really, really important. Thank you. And thank you for bringing up mental health and the issues that COVID have brought up as well as important things that we should be thinking about. How 20, 30 years ago, where we started to think that disabled people could be in the workforce, right? It's like, yeah, they can be in the workforce too. Now, mental health and other issues, we're all human beings. So there has to be some sort of a human care. How I would suggest we wrap this up is we just do kind of a rapid fire, maybe 1 minute each, and then we'll close out the program. Is there anything else that you'd like to add, or anything you feel like was left out, or any other points that you'd like to reemphasize? And Dave, we'll start with you. Just a rapid fire 1 minute. What else would you like to say before we close the program?
I just think it's important that we do everything we can to help get young women into leadership positions so that they are there as role models for our young students.
Absolutely. Totally agree. Kim, how about you? What would you like to close with?
I think that we will not see true equality until we realize a future where we no longer need SBA programs that help with equality.
Well said. Thank you. Felecia, how about you?
Yeah, I think that we need to change the rhetoric to women need to have a place at the table, to men need to create space for women at the table.
It's not a zero-sum game, is it? We lift someone up and we rise with that person. And for some reason, some folks kind of don't see that yet. Beth, how about you?
So I would say that we as women, we play a great role as being peacemakers, and we are the change agents. We're the problem solvers that bring people together in the face of adversity. And I think our role makes a difference if we plan to create a path forward for the younger generation, and that we can hopefully enter into a global working environment that eventually is free of stereotypes and culture and gender barriers. And I think all of the people on this call get that, they model it, and we just have to continue communicating that message and spreading the word that that's the direction we all need to be moving toward.
Great thoughts. Thank you. Lelani.
I think that we each bear a responsibility to take the time to research and learn and to prepare ourselves so we know what's out there and how to, the resources, the education, so we can guide others. And as part of our leadership, be that mentor that points someone in the right direction.
Thanks, Lelani. Your entrepreneurial spirit is inspiring because, sometimes people get kind of lost in a spiral where they feel like they don't have the control to have an impact, but they can. That point has been made here already, right? It's like you don't need to blame anybody else or it's bad, but you have the control over what direction you go in, and doing it sometimes is just the thing to do. So thank you for emphasizing that all the way through today.
Thank you.
Cheri, how about you? You get the last word.
One of the things that came up for me, I think, in the discussion about, negotiation and education and work-life balance and being mothers and wives and participants is, I think we will all be better off when women truly feel grounded in their inherent value, that I don't have to justify myself. I don't, that I come to the table and I know what I'm bringing to the table. So if we can instill that and inculcate that value in our young women coming up, I think the conversation and the dynamics of global leadership will change significantly, because then, I don't have to justify anymore. I know who I am and I know what I bring.
Fantastic. Great way to end it. Thank you all. Just extraordinary conversation. I would contrast this with others that we've had because from a standpoint of education, because we've had a couple people here very deeply rooted in education. I thought your points around that are so important. Get a good education. And then the other aspects, which we've heard before, but I don't think as articulately as today, is now that you have your education, get stuff done, go accomplish. And you can do pretty much anything you want to. There will be challenges, there will be barriers, it will be frustrating. It's not simple. We're not at an end state. We won't be in an end state when I die, or maybe even when many of the folks that are either listening or even presenting today, pass away. This is an ongoing issue. It's not going to be solved. So we need to make both the best of it and make it better. So thank you all for making it better throughout your careers. Thanks for hanging in there and continuing to make things better. Our next program like this, Women in Global Leadership, is in about 5 weeks. It's a group of women economic development leaders led by Katie Senat of the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, and other folks who are building business around the world, both attracting business and also helping exporters be successful around the world as women. And that's an industry where many women have been successful, and we'll be hearing about their success and also probably a few challenges as well. Thanks, everybody. You have a good rest of your day. This is Doug Brunke with Global Chamber, and you've been listening to Women in Global Leadership with a strong Salt Lake City and Las Vegas connection, the Las Vegas with Kim. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.